All right, how is it going, my magnificent sons of bitches? Now, I am back on three platforms right now. I'm on my YouTube, which is a Prodigal Hill. I'm on my Facebook, which is, of course, my name, Michael Polston. And I'm on my Twitter account, which is Superboy Prime right now. So, I got my buddy here, Big Kevs World. Links are in the description for Big Kevs World, and it's also a link in the description for a channel called Spira Series, which a lot of this information that I'm going to go over actually comes from. Whenever we get into the bigger context, particularly whenever it pertains to Chris Benoit, if you have any real interest into a lot of the stuff, a lot of the investigations as it regards and why so many people want the Chris Benoit case reopened, then I suggest you go to the Conspiracy Series channel because there is a lot of stuff, singling out a lot of foul play. However, Big Kev, this is about how the wrestling business back in the 80s was turned into like a mafia type thing. And we were just going over in the hangouts and stuff like that. But I wanted to go ahead and get your take on what you think about the business right now. And particularly in some of these cases, it's not as bad right now as it was back in like the 80s and the 90s and the early aughts. But with that being said, yeah, what do you think about like the business back then and some of these suspicious deaths and whatnot that occurred all the way up until, kind of the modern day product?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I watched a recent interview with Hulk Hogan. He was on the Joe Rogan show, and he claimed that working for Vince and going overseas to other promotions, he said you had to carry weapons in your bag. Like some wrestlers carry guns in their bag, some had to carry knives in their bag, and Hogan actually was threatened with a gun once or twice. And it's kind of one of those things where if you look at wrestling today as a whole, they travel together, they're laughing, they're having a good time, stuff like that. Back in the day, it was not like that.
Yeah.
Back in the day, it was a total different ball game. And it's like, for example, the Jimmy Snuka thing. It took them almost 30 or 40 years to figure out that he killed his wife. But yet Vince is the one that covered it up for him. And why did Vince cover it up for him? Because Jimmy Snuka was one of his top stars in the company. So
Yeah.
And it's really suspicious. And I still believe to this day, and a lot of people will disagree with me on it, I still think something shady happened to Owen Hart to this day.
I do too. And so I want to go ahead and lay down the foundation for really what this video is actually about. Because, we go into these chat rooms and they'll sit there and dismiss us as silly conspiracy theorists. And the reason why, I'm in a chat, I'm in a group with Dark Horse with the Chris Benoit thing, and a lot of people are skeptical, and rightfully so, about the Chris Benoit investigation. And a lot of people, like I said, they're dismissive, and this is because they're lazy and they're afraid to admit that, maybe I was fooled by the media. Maybe, there is more to the story that they're not telling us. And let me tell you something, there's a lot more to the fucking Benoit story. And that's why I included the link to the Conspiracy Series channel in the description. Because in case you want to go ahead and learn more, myself and Dark Horse have both done like a lot of looking into this, the Benoit thing personally. So that's where it's going to be like a large portion of this video is going to be dedicated to Benoit, but we're going to also get into a lot of other people as well. So I'll go ahead and lay down the foundation and see what you think. I'll bounce it off of you. But I wanted to go ahead and get into why I believe ultimately that the wrestling business is kind of like a racketeering, what they claim Donald Trump is doing, and why it's more like a mafia than it's like the Illuminati, occultist type stuff that they all seeing eye and the stuff that they put out in front of you. And the reason why is because whenever Vince McMahon first bought the WWE back in the 80s from his father, The deal is that Vince McMahon Sr. was going to go ahead and sell the company to Vince McMahon for a set price, and I forget right off the top of the head what that set price was. But the younger McMahon would be obligated to go ahead and pay these set payments every month at a certain period of that month. And if he was ever late just one day, that the entire company would go back to his father, Vince McMahon Sr. Unfortunately, for Vince McMahon Sr. that had this all played and played out and everything like that, and had his own set of partners, the Vince McMahon Jr. wasn't going to go ahead and allow this to, he wasn't going to wait and be obligated to go ahead and pay out a series of installed payments. So, like in that movie Bugsy, if you go back and watch the movie Bugsy, Bugsy is trying to build this hotel called the Flamingo.
Yep.
And ultimately, he has to get people because he needs so much money to go ahead and build this, front. And it was going to be basically a mafia laundering scheme is what it was. But to go ahead and establish this hotel, he kind of, over leveraged himself on how much it was going to cost to build a hotel. So he got people to go ahead and invest from the outside into this hotel. And then they would be, you have all these special privileges and bonuses, and they would make money off of their investment and whatnot. He would make sure that he would go ahead and repay those monies back. However, like I said, the hotel was over leveraged. And ultimately, this is what led to Bugsy Siegel's death. This is exactly what Vince McMahon did to go ahead and purchase the WWE. Maybe not with the Mafia, people out there, not with freaking Mario Lansky or, Lucky Luciano. He wasn't leveraging with the big Hollywood elites. He was basically leveraging this with other promoters, bookers, people that were in the business. He was offering lifetime jobs, certain privileges, certain benefits to these people. So they had an invested interest to make sure that the WWE, which was the WWF at the time, succeed. You know what I'm saying? And
Yep.
basically, it used to be territories. Everything used to be territories. So that means that if Big Kev, he had a wrestling promotion in Tennessee, Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I'm in Texas. I had my promotion, which was WCCW. And, you would have my buddy Sanchez Clark. He would own NWA up there in St. Louis. Everybody had their own little territory. Stephen Rose might run the Houston territory. You had the Georgia territory, which Dark Horse might run. You had the AWA out on the West, and everybody respected each other in them territories. It was almost like a competing business, where if a wrestler or an entertainer didn't work out in my territory, they may go to Big Kev's territory. If they didn't work out in Big Kev's territory, they may go ahead and head down to Dark Horse's territory. And, they had a lot of options there. And so ultimately, this is how you built up your main event caliber talent that you know and love back in the 90s and in the early 2000s, whenever, you had the WCW and the WWE, whenever you had a Hulk Hogan wrestling in the AWA, but you had a Ric Flair wrestling in the NWA, you had the Von Erichs down here, which was killing it in Texas, and the WCCW, and you had the fabulous Freebirds being built up in Georgia. And every once in a while, they would go to different territories, sell out their promotions. They were all getting built up really good. And then you had these main event matches that everybody wanted to see. Then what essentially happened was Vince McMahon decided he was going to go ahead and nationalize the product. He was going to centralize to one wrestling promotion, and that was going to be it. So ultimately, they all had an invested interest to make sure that this promotion was successful.
Correct.
And that's exactly what happened. So, Kev, what do you think about that? Because you remember the territories a little bit, don't you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Harley Race was kicking it in Missouri. The Von Erichs were in Texas. The Freebirds were in Georgia. But see, what people don't understand is that this is where Polson's kind of meaning about the Mafia situation. Hulk Hogan was popular in Minnesota. That's where Hulkamania was born, not the WWF, not the WWE. He started doing stuff on AWA because of the whole Rocky 3, him becoming Thunder Lips. And what happened was he was getting so popular And when Vince bought the company from his dad, he knew he needed a shot in the arm. He knew that he needed someone popular. So what did he do? He goes and steals Hogan from Vern Gagne in AWA. And
And
then
you
that
got to wonder how much of that really is him stealing Vern Gagne, and how much of that may be bullying Vern Gagne.
could have been, yeah, it could have been bullying, because I remember there's always that legendary rumor that when Iron Sheik faced Hogan in Madison Square Garden, Vern Gagne wanted to pay Iron Sheik money to break Hogan's leg. Now there's some interesting concepts to that, because we all know that Vince Sr. wanted to keep the territories as it was. He respected. He used to lend out Andre the Giant to other companies. Used to be fine with that. His son had a different, as we know, Vince McMahon today had a different mindset, and that was to crush everyone in his path. And he needed that jump start. So that's when he started bringing in guys like Roddy Piper, started bringing in Paul Orndorff. He took the hearts. He took the hearts from Stampede Wrestling in Canada from Stu Hart. And
Yeah, which was a big one, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And what happened was they said that Stu Hart and him, the money went out of business, or he started going out of business. And I started wondering, why would you go out of business? Who's pulling the strings behind the scenes here? And he needed all this new, fresh talent in order to monopoly, to create a monopoly with the WWE. And it started with Hogan.
Right.
It started that way.
And you take about look at the time, right? That Vince McMahon buys the WWE, and you bring up Stu Hart. Ultimately, at this point in time, whenever he buys the WWF or rebrands it, it was Capital Wrestling, basically is what it was. But whenever he ended up buying it and rebranding it into the WWF, the biggest territory wasn't the WWF. It was still WCCW. In fact, WCCW got to be so big, and they were in such a big demand, that they actually had to break away from the NWA later on, just because they were, really killing it, because they had the most charismatic wrestlers. They had the most intriguing. They were the originators of a lot of your pay-per-views and stuff like that. They were the first ones really to start making wrestling and consider professional wrestling. And it was only by chance. It was only because the Dallas media stations needed a filler between certain times, and then people ended up liking it and watching it, that they ended up being able to get more people into the sport at this point in time, getting more people more interested. And it ended up inflating that promotion just because of the network deals and stuff like that, that they were getting really, really, really big. So they were the biggest promotion at the time. And then, they had just kept on growing through the 80s. But it wasn't until Vince McMahon purchased that WWF. And like I said, you have all these promoters and all these bookers and all these other talents that were invested and were making sure that the WWF didn't have any competition, because they were invested into it. Remember what I'm saying at the beginning of it? He had investors into this company. That all of a sudden you get suspicious death. With the first major wrestling death that I can remember personally myself. And I mean, the other wrestlers that died, don't get me wrong, but this one was one of the first suspicious ones that not a lot of people, particularly like a lot of you younger people, won't know anything about. But the first one was David Von Erich. And David Von Erich was a big one, because that's like losing your biggest draw. That's like losing your Hulk Hogan at the time. This guy was going to end up being the world heavyweight champion, the NWA, the true world heavyweight champion, and he was going to end up winning that from Ric Flair.
There's also the suspicious death too. A lot of younger people may not know it, but Bruiser Brody, badass guy, badass guy, goes to Puerto Rico, And here's the odd thing about that, Poston, and a lot of people don't know this. There was other wrestlers in that area when he got killed. No one wants to speak up.
Yeah, and the thing is that Bruiser Brody was there whenever David Von Erich died in Japan,
Right.
who
Yeah.
supposedly died of anywhere from diverticulitis to alcohol poisoning, drug overdose, and the story changes. It's kind of like the Chris Benoit thing. You know what I'm saying? They fling shit on the wall and they pray for it to stick and hope people accept that. Oh well, they were just wild and crazy kids, and sometimes they die young, like David Von Erich did. But do all the motherfuckers die young? Because like all of the Von Erich's boys died around the same age. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, uh, it's funny that you mentioned Bruiser Brody because he was the one that actually ended up, I think, finding David Von Erich or letting people know exactly who this was because they were in Japan, and he was one of the ones that was there. And whenever we go ahead and get into this a little bit more, you're going to find out that there are other people that were at the scene of other crimes that ended up dead. And like I said, I don't believe in coincidences. But what Kevin just referred to about the Bruiser Brody was this man was taking a shower. And, supposedly, according to allegations and stuff, according to the alibis that people give, because at this point I'm going to call them as alibis.
Right.
I'm not going to call them, information. I'm not going to call it an investigation. I'm just going to call them alibis because it's what the fuck they are. It's just an alibi that they put out, and hopefully you buy it. But he was killed in the shower, stabbed in the shower. Does that look like a hit to you?
And I do know that Bruiser Brody never went to the WWF. I know that Vince was interested in Bruiser Brody. I think Bruiser Brody told him no. That kind of makes sense because I know that Vince was trying to get his hands on the Von Erichs too. And he did get one. He did get Kerry Von Erich as a Texas Tornado, but he was. It's like what you said. He was dipping his hand into some really deep stuff, and the investors. People don't realize that Vince almost went bankrupt on the first WrestleMania. Like if that was not a success, his dad would have took back over, like you were saying, and it would have been a totally different ball game, and everything that Vince worked for would have been gone.
Yeah, and like the thing with the Von Erichs and the Bruiser Brodies, and another great talent that died under mysterious circumstances, Gino Hernandez, because like Bruiser Brody was ultimately like the Mankind Rock of his day. You know what I'm saying? Undertaker, or not the Mankind Rock. He was more like the Mankind Undertaker of his day. Yeah. That was kind of what he was. He was the powerhouse. He was the guy that was supposed to be, this unbeatable guy, just a real badass is what he was. In fact, he fought the Undertaker at one point in time, trained the Undertaker. But, he was that guy for, WCCW. And then you had Gino Hernandez, that was the Rock. That was his character. In fact, the original Rock was Gino Hernandez. You go out there and listen to his promos and see how he carries himself. That's exactly what the Rock was. Being how Michael Hayes is so invested into the WWE, which I know Dark Horse, has his suspicions about Michael Hayes. It makes sense that he would take some of these gimmicks and characters and put it on other wrestlers, because if it worked in WCCW, then it's going to work in the WWE. And that's where, like I said, a lot of these guys is where you ended up getting the Attitude Era at.
Me and Dark Horse have something in common because I'm very suspicious of Michael Hayes myself.
But yeah, you look at that and you look at, so you lose David Von Erich.
Yep.
And then, you end up, getting Kerry Von Erich over. And not too much longer after, I think, not too much longer, you lose essentially what equates, well, You know, because I'm not sure. I think that Mike the second one that actually died. I think that Mike might have been the second one that ended up dying. But anyways, you ended up losing Mike Von Erich. No, that one's kind of a weird one too, because he ended up, having to get surgery or something, and for some reason it was a botched surgery, and then he ends up basically recovering from this. How's it going, Jason? I haven't seen Jason in a while. But he ends up recovering from this, and ultimately he commits suicide later on. It's weird. You know what I'm saying? You know, he recovers, comes back, and then all of a sudden it's a suicide. You know, it sounds like a Clinton side is what we call them now. You know what I'm saying? Where you're not really sure if it's a suicide, homicide, you say it's a Clinton side. You know, the motherfucker probably knew too much. So you go on from him, and, Chris, of course, he commits suicide. And all these kids are committing suicide, except for David, who died. Nobody knows why, how he died, in the hotel room in Japan. Just right after Vince McMahon buys this, right here. This is his main competition right here. And then you get the death of what is considered The Rock, which is Gino Hernandez. And if you ever hear Gary Hart talk about Gino Hernandez, because that was his guy. That was his guy that he trained, that he put up there, that he was going to push out there to be essentially what would their version of Ric Flair, kind of. He was getting title shot after title shot, and this guy comes up dead.
I'm looking at the Von Erich thing. It says that Mike died of an overdose of a prescription used to treat, insomnia and alcohol beverages. That's what the death certificate says. But there is so much weird stuff because Chris died in 91, and then Kerry Von Erich also committed suicide in 1993. That's a coincidence. From 1987 all the way to 1993, Mike, Chris, and Kerry commit suicide.
Yeah, right there together.
Yeah, it's weird.
And you hear Bret Hart talk about Kerry, and he goes, "Oh man, he was a fun guy. He acted like he totally loved life. I never expected him to commit suicide because him and Kerry worked together. During that time, in WWE, you understand. You mentioned the Stampede thing, and see, I think that's ultimately what helped out Stu Hart and the Harts, why they didn't suffer the same fate as the Von Erichs. I mean, they would eventually suffer their own tragedies. Don't get me wrong. A lot of suspicious stuff with that. But essentially, basically, what ended up happening is Vince McMahon went ahead and went in, after, because that was his main competition. WCCW was Vince McMahon's main competition. It was the Kerry Von Erichs. It was them Von Erich boys who were doing promos with Mr. T, just like Hulk Hogan was. They were bringing in Will Smith before anybody was bringing in Will Smith. Whenever he was with DJ Jazzy Jeff, just starting out in the 80s. That's why a lot of people, sit there and said that, that's why I did the little meme where I was like, whenever Will Smith slapped the shit out of Chris Rock, I put the little WCCW logo on Will Smith. And then I put the little TNA logo over Chris Rock. And I was like, yeah, because that's what would have happened in real life. But, go ahead.
Speaking of what you're saying, Post, and what you said about Dark Horse having this thing about Michael P.S. Hayes, one of the biggest Von Erich feuds in Texas was against the Freebirds.
And that feud was epic. It was like the biggest thing in wrestling.
Right.
Probably bigger than, if you were to compare apples to apples and the amount of crowd that they pulled in with that rivalry of the Von Erichs, it would probably rival anything. Even the, Sting versus Undertaker, where you had actually wrestling had already started on a downhill. So that may not be the best thing. But whenever maybe the WCW invasion to WWE, it would have rivaled something like that in interest at the point in time. You know what I'm saying? Because that was, whenever they got into that big rivalry, man, in the 80s, that was, because it was new, it was fresh, it was something that started out anyways. wrestling was just starting to get popular as far as people watching it on a nightly basis in their home living room. You know, you used to wrestling, you had to go to the Coliseum to watch it. There wasn't a lot of live showing events. It didn't come on TV every day. That just started kind of like in the late 70s and the early 80s, like I said, with these TV stations just trying to put out a filler. And it just so happened that people ended up, there was a market for professional wrestling.
You know, there's this that feud with them was just is really, you know, I honestly believe that feud doesn't get talked about enough, and it should. You know, there's a lot of great things with the Von Erichs and the Freebirds back then. It was just, it's what storytelling should be in professional wrestling, and I feel like that's what is one of the biggest arts that's missing today.
And it was Fritz Von Erich that started the first what you would consider mega event pay-per-view. It wasn't probably pay-per-view at the time because they would, but it was a pay-per-view like main event card. You know, he was the first one to start that with the Star Wars. Wasn't WrestleMania, wasn't the first big main event type of programming that was specially syndicated for nothing but main event status matches. That would have been Star Wars back in the 80s. So after, you get your WCW taken out, right? And then he's starting to poach your Hulk Hogan's, your Superfly Jimmy Snukas. He's poaching your, your what's up?
Roddy Piper. It was poaching.
Yeah, your Roddy Pipers and stuff like that. That's going through these territories. After he starts, because the other territories he didn't have any problems with. Like I said, you had the Hearts come down, which was another. He had a hard time trying to get the Von Erichs, and he had a hard time trying to get the Hearts at the time because that was a family promotion. And where the Hearts decided that they were going to go ahead and wrestle for Vince because they were going to get national attention, the Von Erichs didn't have that problem. They were already getting national attention. In fact, they were outdrawing Vince McMahon in New York, which was his territory.
And if you think about it, though, WWE finally did get a hold of Terry Funk for just a little bit in the mid '80s, but it didn't last very long. The Funks really didn't need it; they were already established as it was. But yeah, the Hearts definitely need it. And if you see though, Vince only took Dynamite Kid. He only took British Bulldog, Jimmy Neidhart, and Bret Hart. He didn't take the other Hart family members at the time.
So we come back to the early 90s and stuff like that. And, he has this guy named Brian Pillman. And if I'm not mistaken, now correct me if I'm wrong, I think Brian Pillman was thinking about jumping over to the WWE because he was pretty much the guy that could cut the best promos. He was a great in-ring worker. I actually remember him from being Flying Brian because I remember seeing him as Flying Brian at one point in time. But he's a great worker, told interesting stories with his promos, got into a bunch of, and then all of a sudden this man comes up dead. So we can start to see that there's a lot of these people that are coming up dead mysteriously.
Well, here's the thing, though. He finally gets over to the WWF around 96. He joined the Hart family in 97. And then at the pay-per-view, he was doing something he was feuding with Goldust at the time, and he was doing stuff with Marlena, which rumor has it that him and Marlena were having an affair. But he was 35 years old, and the autopsy claims that Brian Pillman died of a heart attack. However, Austin explained that this cause was previously undetected of heart disease, a condition which would lead to the death of Pillman. So I don't know. That's just a little suspicious to me. He's in a feud with Dustin Rhodes, Goldust, and he dies the night at a pay-per-view with a heart attack, which Stone Cold claims was not a heart attack for Brian Pillman.
Yeah. When did Brian Pillman die? It was 97, right?
Yeah, October the 5th, 1997, Bloomington, Minnesota.
Yeah. So, you'll run into these, heart complications quite a bit in professional wrestling. If you went back and looked at a lot of the people, it's always the standard cookie cutter. Oh, it was a heart attack. Oh, it was from this and it was from that. But, whenever it becomes a trend, it's suspicious. So, of course, what do you guys think happened to Owen Hart? Do you guys think they deliberately cut the cable? I don't think that they deliberately cut the cable, but we know that they used the guy that was doing it and whatnot wasn't really licensed to do that kind of stuff, and a lot of people told them about it, and it was a whole weights and variable thing, and they just ignored a lot of it. And
Well, they did this thing. I don't know if anybody has Vice, but they did a dark side of the ring with Owen Hart, and pretty much what they claimed is he was practicing this jump days before the pay-per-view, and he was working with a professional at the time. And then all of a sudden, when he gets to the arena, they don't have the professional anymore. They have this rookie person who knows really nothing about the safety of this. And Owen Hart, being a performer that he is, still decides to go with the thing. But I don't think it was cut. I don't think the cable was cut deliberately. I just don't think it was on him tight enough, and I don't think that it was on him right.
I think it was definitely neglect, and I do believe that there could have been some foul play involved, because one thing, well, why would he kill? To me personally, Owen Hart is the best Hart. He was my favorite Hart, at least. Mm-hmm. Maybe to other people, to each their own. He was my favorite Hart. Always laughed. He always had that charisma to me, and a good in-ring worker.
He was mine.
However, with that being said, two reasons why. First reason, of course, the Montreal screw job, and of course he's the brother to Bret Hart. Bret Hart goes to WCW, feels like he's screwed over. And then, maybe, somebody might have thought that this might have been deliberate. I don't think it was. But then he gets into that match with Stone Cold, where he ends up injuring Stone Cold and putting him on the ropes for a while.
Oh, which was an accident. In the ring.
Yeah, it was an accident, Yeah. But, ultimately, that's probably, you could sit there because you need motive. We know that the reason why the Von Erichs would have had to have been taken out was because ultimately they were the biggest draw in professional wrestling. You talk about Hogan all you want to, but in the early 80s, all the way up into the mid 80s, the Von Erichs were the biggest draw in professional wrestling. They were, in the biggest feuds, had a feud with the Freebirds, had the feud with Ric Flair, had these charismatic characters that were just wildly, the storytelling, even with the feud between Gino Hernandez and Stella Mae French. That was good shit and way ahead of its time. Fucking Stella Mae was driving a fucking semi to the fucking ring.
Yep.
And, stuff that wasn't, normally thought of. Whenever Fritz did it, Fritz did the damn thing right. He was ahead of the shit that you see from Vince. He just stole from all these people in the territories. So, you have the Von Erichs being taken out, and it's all mysterious. You have the mysterious death of David Von Erich, which was ultimately the basically foundation. Kevin was the oldest, but basically everybody knew that David was going to be the guy. Kevin was going to be the business mind eventually. He was going to end up taking over Fritz's business. He was going to be the one to go ahead and inherit WCCW. But David was going to be the guy, be the man. And then you had Kerry ended up taking that mantle of being the man, only because he kind of looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and that was a big thing at the time. They had these gimmicks that were, like I said, ahead of their time. where you could like, okay, this guy looks like Conan the Barbarian. Kevin kind of looked like Luke Skywalker. They had these gimmicks back then, you know what I'm saying, that they were running with. And, so they were the biggest draws. And like I said, I don't believe in coincidences. And whenever you have all these deaths all of a sudden start to pile up, benefiting you, then we've got to sit there and look at it. And it seems like it's just protecting the business. You know what I'm saying? And,
Hey,
you know,
what's even more fucked up about this whole Owen Hart situation was, I think he was stuck with his contract. I think he wanted to go to WCW with his brother, but he was stuck in his contract. They put him in a blue blazer gimmick to basically humiliate him. And what Owen, being a true professional, he decides to stay with that. But what the strangest thing about this whole thing was, the fucked up part is they kept going with the pay-per-view. That is one of the most heinous things you could do to somebody. Because let me tell you this much, Bolson. If that would have been Stone Cold, if that would have been Undertaker, Vince would have stopped that pay-per-view.
Oh, yeah.
Easily.
Then they would have made it all about Stone Cold.
Right.
They would have made the whole next week all about Stone Cold. And they did a tribute to Owen Hart in their defense. But, it just seems like it was, a little bit too shady, for me to go ahead and, all of a sudden, this guy right here has rubbed the business the wrong way. Stone Cold, because at this point in time, Stone Cold was their draw. He was the one that was coming up. He was the one that the fans were getting invested in. He was the one that, did the, Austin 316. He was the one that was doing the promos and whatnot. And that was the one that they were fixing to push to be the main event guy in WWE. For him to get injured like that and be put on the shelf for as long as he did, well, you could see how a lot of guys would have been like, oh, well, you know what? Screw this guy. Well, see, Vince Russo, but you can't take that seriously, Scott. Nothing against Vince, but Vince is going to be biased on that. Vince is going to, say, oh, he just loves being there. Of course, Vince is going to say that. So,
The reason why he's saying that is because Owen Hart was a true professional. No matter what you threw at him, Owen's going to do the job, regardless. It's one of those things like, it's like, you have to give Cody Rhodes credit for when he was doing Stardust. He hated doing the Stardust gimmick, but for a while there, he stuck with it. He had to make it work. And it's not one of those easiest things to do, but I honestly personally believe they put the blue blazer gimmick on him to humiliate him. And when that didn't work, and this is why Owen Hart is one of my favorite Harts. Owen Hart had so much charisma, like Postal was saying, that he could make anything work. No matter what.
I used to like him as the Black Heart. Whenever he goes, yeah, I'm the Black Heart, and just the shit that he would do was just fucking it was gold. You know what I'm saying? It's like, man, and this was me, right? If it would have been me booking the Montreal Screw job, and I was going to put the belt on somebody, I would have had Owen Hart come out as the Black Heart. I know Brett's leaving. Brett doesn't like Shawn. He doesn't want to put the belt on Shawn. They have some sort of history. Okay, it is what it is. I don't know what the history is, but I'll be like, okay, you know what? This man has contributed to my company. He's helped build this company. He's going to go out. He's going to, show him a little bit of respect. I would have had him go ahead and drop the title myself if this was me doing it. If I was Vince McMahon, I'd said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You don't want to go ahead and lose the belt to Shawn Michaels in Canada. I get you. I'm not going to let my ego get in the way. I'm not trying to embarrass you. Had a great relationship with you. You're going to go into another company. I'm not going to be petty about it. So I would have booked Owen Hart to come out as the Black Heart turn heel on Brett, and then I would have had Brett drop the belt to Owen Hart in Canada. And then I would have ran with Owen Hart as being the next big main event Hart that I would have in my business. You know what I'm saying? Because that makes the most sense.
Posty, you know what most of these young devs have in common? They always talk about heart attack, suicide, drug overdose, blah, blah, blah. Yes, the wrestlers back in the day, they partied hard. They did. No one's denying that they didn't drink and didn't use any drugs or anything like that. But you look at a guy like Hogan and Ric Flair who did that themselves, but both are in their 70s still alive.
Well, look at Keith Richards, right? Fucking
Right.
rock stars and stuff, like Mick Jagger and stuff. They do all kinds of fucking shit that's probably...
Yeah. Look at Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney.
Yeah. I mean, you know...
Yeah.
These motherfuckers live to be fucking 800 years old. So, I mean, you know, it's something to sit there and say, you know, it's easy for them. You know what I'm saying? It's just an easy thing for them to go ahead and use. So let's go ahead and get into the next suspicious death. Because I don't really have a motive for why they would have done this, so it would have had to have been under the table. I know that Eddie Guerrero was coming clean about a lot of stuff at the point in time, but that would be Eddie Guerrero. So
yeah, Eddie's death was definitely. They said they claimed that he had a hole in his heart from all that past drug death, all that past drugs that he did and alcohol. But Eddie Guerrero was clean for a while. Now, the SmackDown before the death, he looked like he collapsed in the ring. Now, I don't know if something happened to him or not, but Chavo claims that day that they were at the hotel, that Eddie was fine.
Yeah. And which will be another guy that we're fixing to mention. But you had a guy out there, the Ultimate Warrior, who claimed that guys like Hogan would make this juice, right? Which, you know, people would drink, but it would almost give people a fucking heart attack by drinking it. And so, you know, you look at the match where he collapsed during SmackDown, and Dark Horse sent me that video clip and got to zoom in, and you could tell his eyes are dilated. They tried to play it off like, oh, it was him lying, cheating, and stealing that he collapsed and did what he did. He was putting on a stunt to go ahead and get the upper hand, but the motherfucker's eyes were dilated, and that's not right. That's not normal. You know what I'm saying? You know, eyes don't dilate like that to that effect unless there's something wrong with you. And so, yeah, there was something there. You know what I'm saying? It was just very suspicious. And like Dark Horse, if you go back and you, like I said, the link is in the description for the Spira Series channel. And if you have any more interest about this, particularly as it pertains to like Eddie and Owen Hart, and of course, the last guy that we're going to talk about, because it's going to take us a little bit longer, is Chris Benoit. You look at it, right? And, you know, one of the people there, the last people to see him, and this is according to Chavo. Now, Chavo is a little bit more, knows more than he lets on, I'm pretty sure, because his story changes quite a bit. If you ever follow Chavo, when he's talking about Eddie and whenever he's talking about Chris, the stories change from whatever, you know, whoever Chavo's talking to. So we know it's not a consistent story for any of these guys. But with that being said, one of the last people, according to Chavo, one of the last people that they came in contact with was Michael Hayes. And Michael Hayes, he said, gave them this look and was, you know, basically, you know, staring them down, and, you know, was very, like, he was very angry, you know, whatever he was, you know, almost, you know, just irate right before Eddie died.
if you also think about it too, look at what WWE's doing right now with the whole Rhea Ripley and Dominic Mysterio. They have a Dominic Mysterio basically look like Eddie Guerrero with Latino heat.
Yeah, because you had the Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio thing where Eddie claimed that Dominique was his son. You know, so they're going with that storyline and whatnot. And so it's very weird how they use this stuff. So um,
Yeah, I do remember them getting into an argument with Michael P.S. Hayes.
yeah,
Yeah, and that was definitely reported. And yeah, Chavo's story does change a lot. Like it all depends on who he's being interviewed by. I remember him being interviewed by Chris Jericho, and he was telling more than he should have been. And then he went to another interview and he was talking less about stuff. And it's not just with Eddie's death, but with Chris's too. And
right.
so that's where we know. I know that Eddie. I mean, I know Chavo knows something. It's almost like I want to take him and put him in like a lie detector thing and been like, let me ask you these questions because we need to know.
Yeah, because we know for sure that more than likely Michael P.S. Hayes was probably one of those investors whenever Vince was starting up that company. I'd be willing to bet.
Have you noticed though that they've always gotten rid of like certain people in their company, but they never have fired Michael P.S. Hayes?
Yeah, because Vince offered these people lifetime jobs, lifetime contracts, certain certain privileges and whatnot that you could say, they were going to benefit for him going ahead and nationalizing the business.
Bruce Pritchard's another guy who I feel like is like a yes man for Vince. We all know that Pat Patterson and Briscoe was.
Right.
There's a lot of yes. Kevin Dunn is another yes man for Vince. There's just a lot, and I do believe that there's something to those steroid allegations too with him. I do believe he was giving steroids to his wrestlers.
And then you go ahead and take in consideration of what we know about Pat Patterson and the Cream Team,
Yep.
And then you had the whole steroids allegations going on. So whenever you're looking at some of these wrestlers ending up dying suspiciously around that point in time, then, we can go ahead and say that, that there's probably a reason why they're covering it up. Because all of these guys that are connected, that are invested into this business, that went into this business with Vince McMahon, now it's a publicly traded company. So it's a little bit different. Now they have stock options, and the stock's got to do good. But with that being said, ultimately, these guys had an invested interest to make sure that this product succeeded at any cost, at anybody's life. They don't care. It's all about the money. That's basically how the Mafia, and these are Mafia type tactics. If somebody's, going against you, if they're going to sit there and out you for, steroids, which we know, like the next person that we're fixing to talk about. And I'm not sure because, about this time, I'm going to go ahead and skip over. We're not going to go into detail with this. You have Miss Elizabeth, Sherry Martel, Brian Grunge. A lot of these people are in the same circle. You know what I'm saying? With Chris Benoit, with Eddie Guerrero, and we know that there was a big drug ring going on. We know that the guy that was behind this drug ring ended up getting arrested and ended up dying on the exact same day that Chris Benoit died. And
yep, I remember this.
Mm-hmm. So the next one that we're going to get into is going to be the fun one. It's the one that everybody's the main event. Is Chris Benoit. And this is one that I've done a lot more research on than I have the other ones. Even though I am a big Von Erich fan, I do have my suspicions about that. Back in the 80s, you didn't have this much information. Like you couldn't get a lot of the stuff, particularly on David, because it was in Japan. So it's hard to find a lot of the information going on leading up into those events because it just wasn't recorded as much. However, with the Benoit thing, I can almost guarantee you it wasn't roid rage. There was no signs of roid rage. So we can go ahead and dismiss roid rage because, The house was pretty much in pretty much good condition whenever they did the investigation and whatnot, and that's not a sign of roid rage. You'd have seen shit broken. You'd have seen people. And no way the Chris Benoit is going to straighten up and everything. So that was the first excuse that they tried to use. Then they tried to use the CTE thing. It wasn't CTE. Chris Benoit did not have the brain of an 80-year-old with dementia. I'm just going to come out right there and say it. I'm not even going to accept your argument. I don't care what you heard on CNN. It would be impossible for him to do wrestling maneuvers, for him to be in position to win a title, knowing those spots, taking care of his people. You know, they said, I think that the sister of Nancy said that he was taking alternative routes home because he felt like he was being watched, and he felt like his...
Chavo said that too.
Yeah. He felt like his life was in danger. If you have the brain of an 80-year-old with dementia, you're not able to remember all these routes. And in fact, you're not going to be able to go ahead and perform your actions because he would be a silver alert somewhere. You know what I'm saying? He would be lost. You know, he'd be missing. And then he wouldn't know what he's doing. People would notice if he had the brain of an 80-year-old with dementia.
And
so,
and plus he was supposed to be fighting CM Punk for the ECW title right before he passed away.
Right. So they try to make it seem like it's this extra, he had these domestic problems and all that stuff, which, that's speculation. We don't really know a lot. We hear stories after the fact. Seems like if there was, because I remember whenever Deborah and Stone Cold had their little domestic problems, that shit was all over the place. Everybody fucking kind of knew, what was going on. It came out, it leaked. And I think that if, about this point in time, if that was that serious that they make it out to be, the bloggers would have had a field day with it. You know what I'm saying?
And then they try to credit Chris's death of him being heartbroken over Eddie Guerrero. Like they try to blame Eddie over his craziness and why he went crazy. And they did a dark side of the ring with it. They did a 2-parter where they had Nancy's sister on there. They had Chris's son David, which I feel bad for him because he can't get any break in wrestling because of what happened to his dad.
He looks just like his fucking dad too.
Yeah,
but yeah,
and I
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, it's unfortunate that the kid could probably do a lot,
Yeah.
But I'll go and let you finish.
No, it's just, the fact of the matter is that it's like what Poston's saying. And I remember Christopher Nowinski was a part of this. He used to be a part of Tough Enough. He was with WWE. So he has WWE ties. And they they tested his brain. And they even got Chris's dad to believe that story. I'm
glad you brought this up because first off, you have a professional wrestler, right?
Right.
Shit seems kayfabe to me. Oh, he went to Harvard. He came out as this Harvard graduate in the WWE. Don't that sound kind of like, okay.
Yeah. He's studying brains now. And
yeah, you see, he went for what, I think it wasn't for any kind of like medical research. It was like a sociology degree or something. It wasn't a fucking medical degree. He didn't have a doctorate.
Nope.
So, it's weird. Then they bring in this Dr. Amalu, which they build the Will Smith story around. You being an NFL fan, I'm sure you've probably seen that movie Concussion or whatever. Yep. I forgot what the movie was called, but Will Smith, where he played Dr. Amalu.
Yep.
Then you come back to find out that this motherfucker was talking to ghosts in his basement from the people whose brains he was taking home, in his garage. He would take them home and said he could talk to that person, that ghost, kind of like Ghost Whisperers with Jennifer Love Hewitt. My mom loved that movie too. But, it's kind of like what the fuck he was doing. And it just absolutely blows my mind that we have to listen to these people make up a narrative now. And it's almost like it's kayfabe. They're telling you a story. And this right now, like I said, this is one of the stories where I started to go ahead and raise my eyebrows towards the media. And this is whenever people should have really started to question these media narratives at this point in time. Because you'd have a person like Nancy Grace talking about how Owen Hart died from steroids and whatnot, and he fell from the fucking top of the damn ceiling and shit, which
Yep.
outraged a lot of fans. And it almost seemed like it was a narrative. And yeah, but
Also, speaking of this thing with Chris, you remember how we were talking about how Chavo changed the story? The interview in particular I'm talking about, you could probably find it on YouTube, guys, but he was interviewed with Chris Jericho. He said that when he talked to Benoit a couple of days before the pay-per-view, that Chris seemed like he was paranoid, like he was scared of something. And he also said the last time he talked to Chris, before Chris sounded groggy, he said he heard commotion on the other end of the phone when someone knocked on the door. So, but now Chavo will change that story and tell you that that didn't happen.
So, we go ahead and look at the investigation, right? And go into a little bit more. So, you can go look this up. Dark Horse, on his Conspira Series channel, will have all the receipts that I need. And speaking of a receipt, you have a receipt from Publix Market, which we know that's where Nancy went earlier that day before she met her untimely demise, where she bought the 6-pack of beers that's mentioned in a lot of the conspiracy videos and whatnot, particularly about Johnny Angel, and a bottle of wine. Chris really didn't drink that much. He wasn't that big of a drinker. This is why Johnny Angel has suspicion that there was somebody else at this residence at this point in time. That being said, now, what would be the motive for Vince McMahon killing Chris Benoit? Before I go any further with this, well, one, he was under investigation for those same PhDs, whatever it was, whatever this doctor was giving out, these circle of wrestlers from Miss Elizabeth, because they were all friends. Miss Elizabeth was friends, Sherry Martel was friends, Eddie Guerrero was friends, Johnny Grunge was friends. All these people were ending up dying, and this is exactly why Chris Benoit was fearing for his life. And he had been raided like a month or two prior before this happened. You know what I'm saying? By the sheriff's department. So, he was already under investigation. He'd already been raided. And, this had happened way before that. So, we go ahead and look at this. There was actually a pool guy there. And according to the pool guy, cleaning the pool and everything like that, he was said that basically they were barbecuing. They were, according to Nancy's sister now, or was it, Nancy's sister, they were celebrating because Daniel was with the next door neighbor, who is very, very, very fucking suspicious, by the way. He had taken horseback riding lessons from her, and he finally finished his horseback riding lessons and whatnot, and he had graduated from being, basically horseback riding. And so they were all celebrating that. And the pool guy said that whenever he came out there, Chris and Daniel were just fine, laughing, playing, and basically barbecuing pretty much. And so, of course, that was seen earlier that day. So where did he get to be this fun-loving dad with him and Nancy celebrating their accomplishment for Daniel to being psychotic killer Chris Benoit all of a sudden? You see what I'm saying?
But Postal, you get the people like, people can snap. It's a mental thing. People can snap. Let me just clarify something. I've been battling mental illness, and I'm 41 years old. I've been battling all my life. Can there be a switch? Absolutely. But that has to be a real big switch for him to be happily barbecuing, playing with his son, and then going into being the killer.
And not only that, even if it is a mental switch, like they're claiming it is, right, generally people who have these mental switches have had these mental switches for a while. They understand that. Exactly. So they know how to deal with them a little bit better. It's not like, okay, you're sitting there and you just get mad and you start choking people. No. What do? They usually go over. He might have went out, went to somebody's house, talked it over with a friend. If it was that bad, he would have went out and reached out to somebody. somebody else would have heard about it, but we don't
Or he
hear
would have been
about this
prescribed,
until what's up?
or he would have been prescribed like some kind of anti-anxiety or depression or bipolar meds.
Right? Yeah, you would have heard something about it. Is what I'm saying. Not after. It's the same thing that I say about Trump. Is if Trump was this big criminal guy that y'all claim that he is and doing all this, insidious shit, how come you didn't say this whenever before he became a Republican and ran for the Republican nomination? You know what I'm saying? If the crime happens to be convenient for you and then you're going to label it on him afterwards, well, then it's too late. I'm going to be a little bit skeptical. I'm going to think that, you know what, you're trying to frame somebody.
And you know what's weird, when you go back to that phone call that Chavo was talking about, he said that when he heard commotion, he said that Chris called him back on his cell phone, and Chris doesn't usually do that. He usually calls on the main line. Actually, no, he called him on the main line instead of the cell phone, which is something that Chris doesn't do.
Well, see, you also got that phone call that Chris Benoit made to a Michael Parker that just so happened to be on Michael Parker's answering machine. This is stuff that they don't tell you on CNN. And Dark Horse has it on this channel right here on the Spira Series channel. He removes the backgrounds. You can hear people in the background with Chris. So here's the deal, right? After looking at it and considering a lot of the information that Dark Horse sent me and whatnot, I come to the realization, right, that more than likely Chris Benoit wasn't the last one to die, from what I see in the reports, from the autopsies and getting it. So he was, first off, the way that he was committed suicide makes no fucking sense whatsoever. He wrapped a towel around his head, wrapped around a cord, with his weights, with him turned the opposite way, and then somehow pulled the lever and then hung himself that way. You look at the equipment, you look at how he would have had to do it, it makes no sense. It would have been the hardest way to go ahead and commit suicide. Somebody wanted this man to suffer. Why the hell would you go ahead and put a towel around your neck just to go ahead and do it that way? It makes no sense if you're going to kill yourself and you're dead set on killing yourself.
And then when you look at a guy like Chris Benoit's size and stature, knowing that he could defend himself, you had to do something to him first.
So,
I mean, Chris would have easily tried. I think Chris would have went after the intruders, but I think they probably drugged him first.
I think that, something happened, and Chris Benoit, they took out Chris Benoit first because that makes the most sense. Of course, he was downstairs in his little gym, his workout gym that he had. They said that the air conditioner had been turned off in there. So it was really, really hot in there. And I think that he was the first one to die because he had the most deterioration. You know what I'm saying? And this is where he had the brain of an 80-year-old with dementia. Because it would have probably expedited the deterioration, especially being without oxygen and being strangled and that degree of temperature and whatnot. It would have deteriorated a lot more brain cells to make it give you that impression that he died of a CTE like they claim it was, because that was the big thing going around at the time. Then you have Nancy. And this is the one thing that caught my attention, right? And I think that Nancy was the second one to die. And in fact, I think that if the cops would have showed up a few hours earlier, that Daniel may still be alive. And they might have caught who did it, because I think he was the last one to die. Nancy was wrapped up in a fucking rug. And you know what that means, right?
Yep.
That's like a hit. That's what that means. That's exactly what the fuck that means. Whenever it's a hit, they wrap you up in a rug. That's just, what they do and whatnot. That's like, you can look it up myself. I'm not making it up. It's like a Mafia style hit. And then, like I said, the reason why I think that Daniel was the last one to die is because listening to the people talk and looking at the reports, they said that they thought that Daniel was just asleep. So he had the least, because, rigor mortis, it sets in about, I think, 24 hours after death, and then 48 hours after death is usually how long it takes to last. So if rigor mortis hadn't set in, Yet he was probably killed just hours before they came in and looked into the Benoit thing.
Yep. Now, let me ask you this, Post. I know you guys did a really great job, and he's right. You guys should definitely look at this YouTube channel that Dark Horse has with this, because I know you and him worked a lot of hours and a lot of days on this. Um, do you still think that there was Kevin Sullivan involved?
I don't think it would have been Kevin Sullivan. It wouldn't have definitely been Kevin Sullivan by itself.
No.
Now, this is where you get into where, they love to go ahead and show you and make fun of you because, basically you're like Goyim, you're like, schmucks, basically. They love to wrap it in your face. So if you go back, right, to WWE, and why we could sit there and say that this could possibly be a hit, if you go back and look into the WWE, Vince McMahon reserved that 3-hour show for the Benoits 2 weeks earlier because you remember Vince McMahon supposedly blew up in a fucking limousine and whatnot.
Yep.
And, it's ironic. One of the guys that has been oftentimes thought to have maybe had something to do with it would be Dave Taylor. And of course, Dave Taylor was one of the last ones you see leaving before Vince McMahon goes into that limousine. It's funny because it was Dennis Fagan, right? He's the one that made the call to go do a welfare check on Chris Benoit. Now, Dark Horse showed me this, whenever Vince McMahon was giving away that money, one time, you see him with the money all this time, smelling the money. He was giving away, what was it, like $500,000, $1 million, something like that. I forgot what it was. And the guy that was on the phone sounds just like with Vince. Hi, Vince. Oh, good. And then he got the question right and won $1 million. It sounds like Dennis Fagan. So, it really just, goes to show you kind of really how corrupt this business was and, the lengths that they went to go ahead and protect this for it to be doing so bad right now and so horrible. And I think a lot of that has to do with them trying to monopolize the business because ultimately, what's up?
I think what a lot of fans would ask though is if it was a hit and stuff like that, they would probably be asking us why would Vince do it in the first place when Chris was one of his top stars?
Because of the freaking the investigation he was under.
Yep.
That one's the easiest one to answer. Because we know for a fact that he was raided by the sheriff's department before that time. And then not only that, you look at they were trying to start back up Stampede as well. And if you go back and look, the same day that Chris Benoit died, Biff Wellington, his tag team partner in Stampede, also died that same, or might have been the day that Nancy died. It was the day that one of them died. He had died that Friday, I think. The same day that Nancy would have died, probably. Biff Wellington died too.
That's why Chavo's story doesn't add up, because he says there was one time he gets a call from Chris and Chris is all groggy. And I'm like, if rigor mortis does set in within 24, 48 hours, and if Chris' body was the one that was decomposing the most, it's obvious that he died first.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt about it. I mean, that's facts. That's just. And then, what's interesting too is the fact that they said they found steroids at his house. How coincidental?
Yeah. Well, like I said, he was already under investigation for HGH, and like I said, he had already been raided for the sheriff's department way before. Nancy was had a grand jury indictment against her. Versus the state of Georgia, actually. So there'd be, incentives for the Georgia. And like I said, the investigation was over in less than 24 hours. So, it is what it is. And like I said, the Kurt Hennig and the Macho Man Randy Savage, I don't think that those were. Now, maybe the Ultimate Warrior would be one. I do see the Ultimate
I was
Warrior.
about to say that. That's where I was about to go with after the Benoit thing. I was going to say one of the biggest suspicious deaths that I feel like is the Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah, because he comes back, talks to Hogan, does that promo in the ring, and then suddenly dies of a heart attack. Which the Ultimate Warrior actually did a video claiming that Hulk Hogan had invented this concoction and whatnot. That if you drunk it, then it could cause you to have a heart attack later on. And so, yeah, that one's definitely suspicious too. He did not look good. Dark Horse called me up that night. We watched it, and I still regret not doing a video on that. We should have, because he did not look good at all. Whenever he was in WWE, he looked like he was sick, and then the next day he ended up dead.
It's weird that you mentioned about the Warrior because he was a bonus character for the WWE game that year, and he did a commercial for it, and he was ripped. He was really still good. He was still in great shape. And then he was there early, and they said that when he did the walkthrough for the Hall of Fame, he was fine, laughing it up with Vince. And it was the night of the Hall of Fame, and then the night on Raw. Just go back and look at Warrior's promo. He knew.
Yeah.
There was no. Now, do I feel like Vince had something to do with it? Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and probably go ahead and close out this video. The Bray Wyatt thing is just a publicity stunt to go ahead and try to sell you on COVID fears. I think that's what it is. I'm not going to get too much into the Bray Wyatt thing because, to me, that one's kind of suspicious. Luke Harper, supposedly. So, it's kind of like the Kobe thing. Some of these things I don't think that are legitimate at all. Nothing happened at all, and that they're just, decided that they're going to retire and whatnot, and that's the best way to retire.
Can I add something to this posting though, real quick? If you guys want to know how much it's hard to get a hold of Vince, go back at the steroid trial. Hogan was wrestling for WCW at that time, but then Hogan also lied for him under oath.
Yeah.
So that should tell you something right there, because he probably had something on Hogan.
Yeah. And, or Hogan would have ended up dead like everyone else.
But here's the thing. When you go back to these sexual allegations with Vince and him hiding the fact that he helped Jimmy Snuka kill his wife and hid it and everything like that, everybody's wondering, why is Vince not being charged? Why is this not happening? Because Vince McMahon has got some real dirty money, some deep pockets with some deep people.
Yeah, he's got too many connections. Like I said, it's a mafia. It's exactly what he set it up. And Vince McMahon is the mob boss of this particular mafia. And so you're not going to touch the boss. So, and I just wanted to leave you something to think with right now. So what do you think? What do you think potentially happened to all these guys? Because I don't believe in coincidences. And when you have this many people come up dead in the business just for you to go ahead and keep control of the business and to go ahead and monopolize on it to the product that we have today, do you think that it really worked out at the end of the day? So I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap this video up. I still got some stuff to do. We've been on here for about an hour. So y'all people tell me what you think. Go ahead and sub to Big Kev in the description box. Go ahead and sub to Spira Series, which is Dark Horse's channel on doing conspiracy stuff. Go ahead and check it out. Y'all people tell me what you think. You like, sub, do the shit YouTube, the internet tells us to do to get over. And for now, I'm out.